Okay, we have started the recording and this session. I would like to welcome all of our attendees to today's presentation or web panel discussion entitled Localization Evolution in Documentation, Managing Technical Documentation Localization at Micromotion and Adobe. I'm super excited to have Julie Walker of Micromotion with us and Max Hoffman of Adobe. And my co-moderator is David Sommer of NetTranslators. Julie, I'm going to pass the ball to you. Why don't you real quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Walker, and I've been managing technical documentation and translations at Micromotion for over 12 years. My team creates pre-sales material such as product data sheets, and we create post-sales material like installation manuals and configuration manuals. We are a global company, so translations are a very important part of what we do to support our customers. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share what I've learned with you.
Great. Max, why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Good to be with you again. Chris and I used to work together for the same company. Anyway, I'm joining you from Portland, Oregon. I'm the TechCom evangelist for Adobe Systems. And basically what that is I'm the main face of marketing FrameMaker, RoboHelp, in that context of TechCom Suite, Captivate, Acrobat, and Presenter. We do have other evangelists who overlap with Captivate in some of those products. And I basically do blogs, weekly webinars, speak at conferences, and basically just try to provide an educational role not only on our products but also the direction the industry is going in.
Great. And actually, Max, you and I, we saw each other, was it like 2-3 weeks ago in San Jose at Information Development World. It was really great to see you in person again.
Yeah, and Chris, I forgot to mention I did spend 13 years in localization working for translation agencies besides having worked for 3 software vendors and also having been in production. So I was in localization full-time for quite some time up until 2 years ago.
Absolutely, yeah. David, quick introduction.
Yeah, I'm David Sommer. I'm the Director of Strategic Operations at NetTranslators. I've been with NetTranslators about 10 years now. Having worked as a project manager, a senior localization project manager, and today essentially I support the sales and marketing side where I try to bring best solutions for our customers.
Great. My name is Chris Ralph. I have a digital marketing agency called Boulder SEO Marketing, and I'm very honored to be able to organize these sessions for NetTranslators. Also would like to thank NetTranslators for hosting these events. That said, why don't we jump to today's topics. We divided this session into 3 topics: Evolve or Perish, how to build and manage a nimble technical communications department. Topic 2, the intersection of content creation and localization. I'm actually very excited to hear what our panelists have to talk about this topic. And then relevant and useful tools. That said, why don't we, let's do a quick poll. I'd like to learn a little bit more about our audience. Who do we have with us today? So if you don't mind quickly answering, let's know a little bit more about yourself. If you're working on the custom side, I think we have some vendors as well here. You're a freelancer, a linguist, are you an analyst or an industry consultant? And wow, so far the trends, a lot of customer side professionals. Okay, why don't we keep it open for 3 more seconds? So 1, 2, 3, and I will be sharing the results here in just 1 second. Okay, so we got 56% customer side, 6% on the vendor side, 6% freelance translators, 13% analysts, industry consultants, 19% others. David, surprised?
Actually, a little bit this time, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Why don't we actually, let's quickly do another poll before we dive into the session so that our panelists know on how to gauge. What's your level of experience with documentation localization? Are you a beginner, intermediate, advanced, not sure? And we'll probably leave this poll open for another 5-6 seconds. Julie and Max, with this in mind, maybe you can tailor your answers as well. So I'll leave it open for another 5 seconds. And then I will share the results here. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you everybody for sharing your information. 12% beginners, 47 intermediate, 35 advanced, 6 not sure. Julie, any comments on this result?
No, I guess I'm a little surprised about the smaller number of people at the beginning side of things. So I will keep that in mind as I present.
Great. Okay, let's get started. And that said, I'm going to throw the first question out there. How do you build an effective team to manage, create, implement, and evolve your company's content strategy? Who wants to take that question on?
I can go ahead.
All right, Julie.
All right, so I think there's several things you can do, and I think it's really rallying around what your company and department priorities are. So once you get everyone on the same page with what you need to do, and the timeline for those activities, then you can rally around the goals that you have for your team. And of course being flexible, because a lot of times things just do come up. But if you have that plan and you've got your team marching towards that plan, I think that's a really important part of being a cohesive team. I also think that you really need to understand your customers and what they're trying to accomplish with your products or your services. So, for example, one thing that we have done is to create personas, and then understanding what tasks they're trying to do within those different personas. And we did a lot of work around this, and once we really understand that, and you have your team really understanding the goals for your products, I think, again, you can rally around what kind of content you need to create and to help your customer base. Another thing to do is just to really get to know the products or services that your team or your company produces, and really get hands-on with your products. Really understand how things work, ask a lot of tough questions, really become the subject matter experts for your content. And I think that helps in many ways to get the respect from your technical subject matter experts and your customer service teams, and it gives you the freedom and flexibility to use those personas and tasks with the technical content in mind, and it'll give you some more creativity in how you want to create your content. So really just becoming those experts, I think, are an important thing that you can do with your team.
Great. Very well said. Max, do you have anything to add to this answer?
I think that she covered it fairly well. I think that I just want to share an observation. I've been involved in this aspect of content localization for quite some time, not only working for translation agencies, but before that time when I worked for software vendors, I was involved in the process of deciding when we were going to localize both the software and the documentation, which used to be more of a separate process. And what I've seen that's very positive is over the last 15 years, average corporate citizens, I'm speaking primarily of America or North America, but basically average employees in businesses are much more aware of globalization and translation issues than they were 15 years ago. Around the turn of this century, I was dismayed at how many people looked at localization, something you just thought about at the last minute. There were people who had not internationalized their software content, etc. I think one thing, too, that's really propelling this, and I think it's also a positive thing that will make things better moving forward, is we have a massive number of millennials moving into the workforce, and many of them have had smartphones or some sort of social media for at least 10 years, and many of them have connected with people in other countries. So this is really the first time in our history that we've had a generation going into the workforce that had more than just a pen pal contact with other cultures and people in other countries. I think that that is making a big difference too. So things are certainly improving. There's one area I think there's still room for improvement in terms of building an effective team, and that's just plain old-fashioned corporate politics. And what I see continuing to persist, and this really is a mystery to me, I don't know why, but many clients and many companies that I've worked with have a true wall between sales and marketing. You know, they're almost like little kingdoms, and it's like marketing's like, well, we did our part, you know, why can't sales move further forward with this? So I think that that doesn't sound like that specific to the topic of technical communications, but it is. And the term, and in terms of being nimble, something that I think is going to happen by its own momentum, is that people who used to think of themselves as content creators, technical writers, you know, whoever traditionally did the documentation, that sort of thing, more and more CEOs and C-level executives are beginning to realize that the documentation is a big part of the marketing material, in that more and more people are going online and actually trying out instructions and directions to decide if they're going to buy a product. So there's a real blurring between what we used to think of as marketing and maybe what we used to think of as technical communications and tech comm. And that requires a lot of flexibility on everybody's part. I think we all have to let go of, that's not my job, or, you know, I'm over here in the silo and I don't have to mess around with that sales stuff. Actually, it makes our jobs more fun. You know, it gives us more flexibility. Mm-hmm. We learn more. And I think, to repeat what Julie said, I think one of the key things is really getting to know people, not just the software and the processes, but do whatever you can to have face-to-face or meaningful contact with users or potential users. And that's my 2 cents.
That's a great observation. That said, actually, I do have a question for David. David, what percentage of NetTranslators' overall workload is actually documentation related? And what are the top 3 mistakes you see when talking to new customers, new to potentially documentation localization?
Well, as a vendor, we very much value the numbers. So, you know, in terms of just gross numbers of words, for instance, I would say that about 70% of our business, perhaps even better than 70% of our business, is related to documentation, localization, with the rest being divided among, and I'm talking about like just pure word count, and the rest being divided up into software localization and website globalization. I'd say that the main issues that we encounter when talking to new customers, well, the first issue is their overall readiness for localization. Notwithstanding the improvement over the last 10 years in people's understanding of globalization in general, there's still sort of a lack of not just readiness in terms of, you know, what tools and so on, but readiness in terms of how you create a company that's going to support on all levels the efforts of the company to globalize. And, you know, just to emphasize the what Max had said, that there's a lack of communications between certainly between product and documentation teams, where and also between marketing teams and sales teams, of course, as Max had pointed out. And this lack of communications really can sometimes lead to problems on the side of the customer, where there's no uniformity of terminology, perhaps. There's no agreement on what styles. There's a lack of a general buy-in by all the stakeholders into what the company is trying to achieve. And then, you know, finally, there's also that lack of understanding on the part of the customer of the importance of controlled writing, glossaries, TM management, translation kits, the importance of a good dialogue with your vendor, with your translators, and having just a more smooth type of process.
Great, great. We're already getting a lot of questions in, so we'll get to those hopefully at the end of the presentation. David, I think I'm gonna let you ask the next questions for our panelists.
Yeah, we'll start with Max. Max, how do you go about establishing a documentation localization and a translation strategy?
Hi, I'm just kind of laughing because no, it's an excellent question, but there's certainly a lot to it. I think I'll start by how I would not start it. A mistake that a lot of people have made in terms of trying to put together a strategy is sometimes running out and selecting a tool or a vendor first, and then they will somehow come up with a process or strategy that will, go with that. That's kind of the old traditional method that people did heavily a few years ago, and thankfully that's starting to change. I think that all vendors in the translation area mean well, and I think that they can all be very, very helpful, but all of the translation vendors have got their own prejudices as far as tools or their own way of doing things. So I think the most important thing is really finding out what your priority is as far as geographies. A very critical thing about a translation strategy is a lot of some people who are new to globalization, perhaps they've done some translation but they're getting ready to take their products to the world. There have been cases where a lot of people will look at China and think, oh, there's billions of people, look at this massive market, we must localize whatever we have into Chinese. Well, not necessarily. You may have a product or service that isn't really going to appeal to the Chinese people for cultural or economic reasons. It's just not a good fit. So that's something that needs to be really examined, and that's going to be different for each company and each product. Sometimes people will find they have a very rich market in Turkey and in Scandinavia, and perhaps specifically in Egypt, if they're going into Arabic. So, careful research is required there. The key thing I think about the documentation side of the strategy, later on we'll get a little bit into single sourcing, is we can no longer assume that we're going to be publishing our documentation to paper and PDF, and then we're going to separately create some kind of a web help site, or what people think of as user assistance, and then maybe we're also somewhere else going to create maybe eventually some mobile apps. I think that as much as possible, we need to have a strategy where it's possible to create what we think of as documentation or user assistance, where we have basically one set of source files that are nimble and very flexible, that can be published in a variety of ways. We've all heard the announcement of the iWatch. There's a number of other smartwatches that beat Apple to the punch, but once Apple comes out with the iWatch, the media will pay attention to that. It will pronounce that an important product, and all of a sudden there'll be a huge focus on that, and I think that will be a successful product. Probably the reason I'm mentioning that's going to influence what we have to do. Obviously, people are not going to hold up their wrist and stare at a small screen, for lots and lots of documentation. But receiving information in that fashion on a convenient device on your wrist is going to change people's expectations in terms of how swiftly they can reach information. And I think also it's going to change people's expectations in terms of trying to find small, discrete chunks of information rather than just doing a traditional search, SEO, search engine optimization, and happening to find a reference that's embedded in a bunch of paragraphs. So that strategy, to kind of back up and try to summarize, I think the first thing about the strategy is, number one question is, do you really need to localize? 98% of the time the answer will be yes. Number two, where do you need to localize? And along with number two, don't overlook obvious markets. You might have an enormous market with domestic Spanish within the United States. There's a huge growing market there. Certain sectors where that shouldn't be overlooked, and it is different than continental European Spanish. And then I think the other thing, too, is being very careful in your selection of tools and processes, and also the vendor. You should really re-examine everything. The fact that you're already using Microsoft Word or even FrameMaker, or perhaps you're using some older method of doing XML, I don't think you should be married to or tied to the way you've been doing things in the past. In summary, do whatever you can to make your information portable, so that you can use a different tool if you need to, but find out where it needs to go, how swiftly it needs to go there, and then basically get everybody on board.
Great.
Thanks. Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do have some things to add. Like Max said, again, the most important thing is really just questioning, asking the right questions of your team. What are we trying to accomplish with this product? What type of content do we need to localize? There's, beyond the technical documentation, there could be training, web pages, sales content, marketing materials, social media, videos, all kinds of things that your company could be creating. So you need to be thinking holistically about all the different types of information that your company is getting out there about a product, and make sure that you're targeting the right type of content to localize. Another thing is just to, if you have the opportunity to, like we do at Micromotion, reach out to your colleagues in other countries and verify, once you think you have a plan, verify that that does make sense in those countries. And I've found in my past that we can have ideas sitting here in our headquarters, but until you talk and confirm your thoughts with people in those countries, you may or may not be on the right track. So if you have the opportunity, just confirm your thinking with others. There's also the scary topic of budgeting for translations, and that one, for us anyway, is a really big topic. So what I found is it's really helpful to have a basic knowledge of what each type of content that you produce is going to cost. For example, a documentation type or a video. The more that you do this, the better idea you'll have in your head about what things will cost. So when you're sitting in meetings, you can throw out, hey, if you want to do that, it's going to be X amount of dollars. And to have that knowledge, a lot of people don't realize how much things can cost. And once you put something out there with a certain language, you really need to keep it up. So you need to think about the maintenance of your content as well. And then the last thing I'll add is I think it's really important to get some kind of feedback mechanism once you produce something in your language set. Whether that's having email on your website or a phone number, or just getting the feedback from your sales organization through a survey or some type of mechanism. Because what I found is that post-sale support content in particular is really getting much more attention and visibility in its importance. So if you can link a way back to the translation of that content and show the value of that content, it will help you in your case as you continue on doing the maintenance of your content or in adding on new languages. So to find a way to get that feedback and bring the value back, I think, is important.
Awesome. Great. Thanks a lot, Julie. And we're already a little bit behind schedule. Let me throw one question out there about project management. Strong PM project management is key to success, in my opinion, to any localization project. Max or Julie, tell us a little bit more about your project management process. What do you look for in a PM, and what kind of PM reporting functions have you implemented in regards to documentation localization? Maybe if you could keep it
Sure. And Julie, if you don't mind me starting, I just have a brief a comment to add to this. I think Julie's a little more directly experienced as that. I've worked a lot. I've briefly worked as a project manager, and I've worked very closely with project managers. There's a lot of good software out there to assist in project management, and that's something to certainly investigate. Several really good cloud solutions. Several vendors offer them. There are also some that are independent as well. But I think one of the biggest things I see with project management that still continues to go on is there's a massive amount of project management that is still done through email, just plain email. And we all know what that's like, having a flood of email. In addition to that, the The bad habits that pervade email are just mind-boggling. And I'll just share a couple of examples of things I've seen recently. Many times, it usually comes from the client side, from the customer, but many times the customer will decide that they want to initiate a new project, and they don't remember so-and-so's email. You pretend that Max Hoffman is the project manager. So they'll look for the last email they got from Max Hoffman, and it might say something like, new services offered. Well, then they reply to that email and put in all of these details that they want for the project. And then what happens is the project manager sometimes fails to rename the subject line. If you are forced to work with email, a very, very simple practice you can do, it sounds idiotic, but it works, is you have project numbers assigned to everything, and then you make it absolutely mandatory that every email subject line must start with that project number. And if any member of the team, your own team, a linguist, or the customer forgets to do that, you resend back to them with the project number in it. That one little thing can make an enormous difference because you can search for that number and pull up everything. I've seen a project manager spend hours trying to find a critical piece of information that was buried in mislabeled email. I just wanted to share that one thing, and then I'll defer to Julie.
That's great advice. Thank you.
So I manage all of our translation projects, and at any given time, we have, I'd say, a minimum of 25 projects, usually more like 75 to 100 at one time. So I can't keep all of that in my head. From my side, I actually just track projects on a spreadsheet, including all of our English projects as well. And I have that available on our company intranet, so anyone globally at any time can go in and take a look and see what the status is of our projects. On our translation vendor side, they've got some tools that I can use at any time to go in and take a look and see where my projects are. We generally, a lot of our translations are not on a really timely manner, so it's okay. I just let our translation vendor run with it. But for our more critical items, I make sure up front that I provide all the information that our vendor needs to know as far as what, if there needs to be a review cycle, what the drop dead date is, and so on. And then I use some other internal tools with my team to then track those high visibility critical projects.
Great. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Julie. David, I'm going to let you ask you one more question in this section, and then we'll move on to the next.
All right. So as we know, change is the only constant in life. Max, what kind of processes have you seen evolve over time, and how did you adapt to these changes? And perhaps, you know what, this question might be better for Julie, in fact.
Sure, I'd have Julie start. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is, it's absolutely true. Change is the only constant. Things have changed a lot in our area over the years. I think one of the biggest ones lately has been, as Max alluded to, that there is this different generation coming on board in the workforce, and people, you cannot expect people to read really anything in any kind of depth. Even something that may be like a 2-page document, most likely people are not going to sit down and read that thing from front to back. So you have to be thinking about how can you capture people's attention with your content. How can you draw them in and then either push them out somewhere else where you want them to go, or capture their interest right away when they're looking at your content. Another thing with our technical documentation along those lines is we have, and a lot of companies have, switched from a feature-based content set to a task-based set. So instead of what does this feature do, you're switching it to what are our customers doing with our content, and how can I, as quickly as possible, get them to where they need to go. So making your content as searchable, as user-friendly, as easy to use as possible, and getting away from that feature set. Also, with everything being online, mobile content, videos, there's just so many ways to get content out there right now. You really need to have a strategy around it. I don't think you can just throw things out there and see if they stick, although I suppose you could start with that, but it's really important to make sure that you're going in the right direction and with all these different avenues of ways that you can get content out there, especially with the social channels right now. And then the last thing I'll say is, there's really has been this shift from everything that it has to go in the manual. It's got to be in this book and whatnot. And just the way physically that content is shipped out with products has changed. Personally, we used to print all of our manuals for every single product, and it would go out in every box. And several years ago, we switched to a CD and then a DVD system where everything is now basically in PDFs on a DVD. So just the way that people are getting content in the box when you open it up has evolved as well. And everything to me is around this mindset of quick bits of information as quickly as possible. And then if I get stuck, then I'll go investigate the big manual.
Great. All right, let's move on here. Topic 2, the intersection of content creation and localization. First question. Wow, what are some best practices and strategies for handling large volumes, speed, and meeting budget requirements? The golden triangle. Who wants to take that question?
I could jump in quickly. I think that Julie may have a more relevant answer to it, but something I frequently see happen in this thing, particularly with budget requirements. Many times management overlooks the importance of buying the right tool, especially for authoring and for creating content. And a real typical thing that I've seen is people who have large volume content sometimes are forced to use Microsoft Word, which can potentially do it, but it really requires kind of a 33rd degree Mason black belt knowledge of Word, which very few people have the time to attain. In other words, if somebody totally masters that project, gets all the books and spends about 40 hours of training, they can probably come up to speed on Word where they can possibly do most of what they need to do. There's cases where maybe for an additional $500, they could move to a product solution like FrameMaker or some of its competitors, where you basically have a more feature-rich product that automates a lot of tasks. So I think the critical thing here in terms of managing it for speed and volume, I think the biggest blind spot that management has is not recognizing how much money is leaking out the window from their human labor costs. There are a lot of companies that really don't track how much human time costs to create things. And the analogy that I use is that if you don't pay attention to how much time is being lost on unnecessary manual processes by your staff creating the content with an inadequate tool, it'd be a little bit like living in a wintertime climate with snow and leaving all the windows in the house open, and then you don't understand why you have a $1,200 heating bill. If you were to close the windows or install storm windows or, take that small amount of effort, all of a sudden you have a $400 heating bill. And as silly as that sounds, there are people doing exactly that. They're simply looking at a spreadsheet on how much money they spent on software and what the salary of their employees are, and they're trying to come up with some formula from that. So I think it's very, very critical that you get the best tools possible, that are accessible to the knowledge and talent of the staff that you have, and then that you basically maximize that. And that was all I had to say.
Well said. Thank you, Max. Julie, anything to add to this?
Jump in here as well, if I may, Chris.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so what Max is saying is really just right on, and even more so from the perspective of your vendor. Obviously, the vendor, we will handle any type, any format that the content's in, but we will say to a customer, hey, listen, you might want to consider a different platform for developing this content. You might want to consider being able to choose a better tool that'll give you what you need going forward, rather than just being married to what they started with when they were a startup 10 years ago. Certainly Microsoft Word is a great tool, obviously, and it has its place. But in developing content strategy, I think that it's not really the solution. and a brave content manager has to be willing and able to decide, well, when the tool system that he's using is obsolete, make the jump quickly, and don't wait until you're so mired in your processes with that specific tool that it's going to become a much more expensive. It'll be more expensive to change, and it'll be more expensive to stay.
Great. Julie, any last thoughts on this topic, this question?
No, I think they were good answers.
Great. All right, David, I'm going to let you ask the next question.
All right. So, Julie, what type of quality control techniques have you put into place, and do you find that they work?
Yeah, we have quite a bit of experience in this area. Some things that I've learned include establishing terminology up front. I really think is key, especially when you have new products coming out. So one practice we have in place is that when we start developing content for a new product, we will extract terms that are unique to that product, and we will work with our translation vendor to work with our in-country folks to establish that terminology up front. Reasons for doing that, that you have a consistent content. When you go to then do the full translation, that content is already in place, so it should reduce the amount of time that it takes a translator to do that work. And then you can also answer any questions. We'll have in-country reviewers asking us, what do these terms mean? So it's also an education. Another thing we have in place for quality control is to have our in-country reviewers do a review of the content once it's translated. And we generally follow this practice for a translation or technical documentation translations. This helps ensure that the terminology is in place correctly, that the translation is of the highest quality, and that everything is localized correctly as it should be. We also encourage our in-country reviewers to comment on the content, and this is just another quality check for our content to make sure that it is accurate and that it does make sense. And another thing we do when we get the translations back is we do compare that translations to the English to make sure that all the content is there, the part numbers, revision levels are correct, if the customer service information is localized, and things like that. So in other words, we don't just take a PDF, we make sure that we do one more check before we release that documentation.
Great.
Sounds like you got things under control there.
It's been a process.
Right. So, Max, let's talk a little bit about single sourcing. Can you give us a short definition of single sourcing and tell us a bit more on how one can move from multiple authoring platforms to single sourcing?
Absolutely. I've actually been working with different kinds of single source authoring over the years. Basically a simple explanation would be that you are authoring or creating one set of source files that can then be that can then be published in completely different formats. And probably a typical one today, I would say, is that whatever way you author, which may be with XML and with data, that's becoming more popular, you may have to, well, you undoubtedly still have to publish to print and PDF. I'll make a comment about that later. So print and PDF would be one. Then another one would be your typical tri-pane web HTML web pages, for some help information, because very often the documentation that went to paper heavily overlaps with that. And then, of course, today we have all of the smaller screens. So we're dealing with tablets, phablets, and phones of various sizes. So basically it's authoring from one set of files that can somehow magically publish out to that. Now, people doing this with data and XML, perhaps trying to use something like Data Open Toolkit, typically they have to use something called FO, format outputs. They have to author some rather intense style sheets in order just to get to the PDF, and that can take a lot of development. Then another set of scripts or tools would go out to the other formats that I described. One solution that I'm very happy with, because I'm using it myself and it's a recent one, is the current version of Adobe FrameMaker has a new publish function. So in addition to being able to publish to PDF, and that PDF can actually contain video, and it can also contain 3D diagrams that you can manipulate with automatic hotspots, a single button publish will let you go to 5 different formats. You can go to, most importantly, HTML5 responsive layout, and then the traditional ones like RoboHelp, Chum files, EPUB, and Kindle. The critical thing about HTML5, and I think I would say that's something you definitely want to put on your shopping list for whatever you're going to do for with or without Adobe, if you're going to do single source publishing. It's very critical to be able to publish to HTML5 because that creates something that resembles a web page, but it's basically one size fits all. It's responsive layout or device aware. So basically HTML5 has a threshold in it that when the width of the pixels reduces to a certain point where it becomes the width of a tablet, for instance, your navigation icons will actually change location, become smaller, and your text will automatically scale down. Your tables will automatically become more narrow. Your photographs will scale down smaller. I think we've all had the experience of using a smartphone and going to sort of a traditional website that has a rather wide table, scrolling through that, or even if we're going to what would be a mobile version of a website, it's still sometimes unwieldy to try to get through the traditional things that we have published with. So basically, and how does this relate to this? Why does it matter? The most important thing about single source publishing is you've got one set of files to translate. Before people started moving into single sourcing a few years ago, they would have one set of files for paper and print. They would have another set of files for their web pages, and then if they were doing anything for a mobile device, it would be a third set of files. So they actually had 3 separate sets of source files that had a lot of potentially shared content, but obviously it was a tremendous amount of work for the translation vendor to reconcile all of that. So the first 45 seconds was my simple answer.
Great. And actually, I think we're going to do one more question in this section, and I think Julie, I'm going to ask you. I read in your LinkedIn profile that you were part of implementing an XML task-based authoring and publishing system that has resulted into a 50 to 90% reduction of translation costs per project. How did you do that?
Yeah, this actually just ties in perfectly with what Max was just describing, except the difference is we don't have very many different ways to produce our content right now, so we can't reuse 100% on our website. However, the way that we can reuse our content is across our documentation set. So several years ago when we looked into this, we were using unstructured FrameMaker. We had no reuse plan other than to copy and paste, which gets quite costly and unwieldy to maintain. So we did an activity where we sat down, it was quite a bit of work, and we looked at all of the content that we had for different types of documents. And we realized, based on that activity, that a lot of our content was 100% reused. The main difference would be in how it was implemented in the product. So we found that across our different documentation sets, at least 50% of that content is reused 100%. So once we did that activity, we realized, hey, we have a great case to single source our content and to author in XML with a content reuse plan. So we did a beta test initially to see if this made sense, and we have one set of content for 6 different manuals. What we found in doing that task analysis is that that content is reused 85% exactly. So we did a beta test. We took the main set of content, and then we took that extra, like the 15% content that was in the second manual. We sent it out to translations, and the first set of content, the main content, we've had a cost reduction of 50%. With that second set of content, the translation cost savings was more like 90%. So by really doing that analysis of your content, seeing where you can reuse content, we have found with our content that it is a great cost savings for us from a translation side. And in addition, we now have a formalized, automated way to keep our content up to date. So when we have a change to something, we only change in that one area, but it could affect up to, for example, 10 different manuals. So it's been a really, really good system that we have been able to implement.
Wow, awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Julie. Why don't we jump into topic 3? Why don't we start with localization kits. From the customer side of things, how important are localization kits and what components are crucial? Actually, David, I think I'm going to ask you, how do you handle the topic of localization kits? How important are they for success?
Well, we handle 2 types of localization kits. One kit is what we get from our customers, and the other kit is what we give to our linguists. So in terms of what we get from the customer, it really depends on the maturity of the customer. Some customers are giving us, they might not even know that they're giving us a localization kit when they give us the proper information, the style guidelines, the terminology database, the translation memory, reference material, everything that can help us understand better how we're going to approach this particular translation. Certainly, training materials are great help for us in our localization kit as well. And this information we then have to relay also to our linguists, and we do that really in a distilled manner, where we try to keep them with their finger on the pulse of the particular client on an ongoing basis. So we don't have to start them from scratch each time with new terminology, to learn, new training to learn. We just we give them the new extract the terminology to develop, and this way the learning curve is reduced. So sort of like we're a funnel where we're working on what the customer is giving us, and then what we give to the translators as well.
Awesome. Julie, Max, any additions?
This is Max. I'll just make a quick comment on it. I agree with what he just said, and I think that's an area that sometimes clients are not as sensitive as they should be to the importance of the localization kit. What I've observed is sometimes language service providers or translation agencies have clients that are very intelligent and very educated, and for some reason the localization kit is sometimes looked at as an onerous task, like one extra thing that has to be done, and it's very, very critical because right up front, it helps provide clean content and consistency, and as he was just saying, when you can share that, it's even more powerful. And that was all.
Absolutely. Julie, any additions?
No, I don't think so.
Good. All right. Let's see. Let's quickly address machine translation. Bigger and bigger topic every day. Are you guys using machine translations? If so, how and what kind of best practices and tips could you share? Why don't we, Julie, are you using machine translation at all?
No, we're not.
Not. Okay. Max, any additions on thoughts on machine translation?
Yeah, yes, I'd like to share a couple. First of all, I should comment that in my role at Adobe as a evangelist for our TechCom products, I am not directly involved in the localization efforts at Adobe. We have an enormous team that does that. It's around the world, and we've got some really potent, powerful tools. I do believe that Adobe uses machine translation to some degree, almost kind of like a pre-translate step. But I think this is what's significant about machine translation. In today's state, machine translation will not completely replace the quality and the accuracy that you would get with humans being involved. It's so good translation is so context sensitive. It's so dependent upon the context that it takes some effort. It is possible to achieve good results with machine translation if somebody uses simplified technical English or controlled English, or you could do this with other languages. In other words, if you author in a very constrained way, and if you use a very reduced vocabulary of about 3,000 words in English instead of 900,000, you can actually achieve fairly good results with machine translation. That's okay for certain types of technical manufacturing how-to documents, but it would not work for persuasive or marketing materials. Final thing about machine translation is, the entire world is using Google Translate, and they're getting some degree of success with that, whether it's good or not. So I think the biggest thing is that Google Translate has really changed people's expectations about translation. Right or wrong, they expect it to be less expensive, and they expect it to be simpler than it is. So I think part of the challenge is bridging that gap between the reality of what it takes to make your persuasive information reach another audience, which can require transcreation or even a little rewriting, and then people who are simply feeding a couple of sentences from a greeting card into Google Translate. And that was my share.
Great, thank you, Max. David, I'm going to let you a question.
I think it's also important to note that customers have to be aware of what they're getting when they're getting machine translation. So, and there's not one type of machine translation. Otherwise, if there were, then Google Translate would be a lot more accurate than it is. But there's different levels of what customer has to invest in order to get the quality that he wants to achieve. And the expectation of how long a system would take to implement also has to be addressed. And the costs also have to be addressed. I actually want to ask Julie what types of tools that, if you could share with us, what you're using in general and the importance of the tools in the project scoping and budgeting processes.
Well, so we author in XML. We do use FrameMaker, unstructured FrameMaker for some of our content. I think probably the biggest thing with XML that has shown us is, again, it's the translation cost savings. But again, more importantly, is I think it really forces the writers to think about the content and the more of the structure behind it. So it's not as simple as just opening up Word. So I can't say that it has reduced our authoring time at all. However, our authors are, they're spending more time up front thinking about content, which I would much prefer them thinking in those terms rather than just formatting content. And so FrameMaker has worked well for us in some ways. FrameMaker it's nicer to work with for those types of documents that you have that need more customization with styles. So, for example, our product data sheets, we author all of those in FrameMaker, and that's proven to be a good tool to use in that case. With XML, you are definitely more restricted in what you can do with your styles.
Well, certainly. Chris, could I add a comment?
Yes, please. You're a big tool guy.
Well, thank you. Oh, thank you, and Julie, that was a very typical story and a very good one. Thank you for sharing. I was compelled to make one comment. Some people are not aware that it's actually possible and relatively easy to author directly in both data and XML with FrameMaker. The product has changed over the last few releases, and as of about the last 3 releases, we're now up to FrameMaker version 12. You can actually create data topic concepts, etc., directly from scratch. You can create a new data map or new XML files from scratch, and there's a reasonable set of templates that are easy to modify. So the reason I'm mentioning that is that did not used to be true, and there's a lot of people out there who are familiar with what FrameMaker did 7 years ago. So there's a sizable segment of people who think they have to make a choice between FrameMaker and XML, and that's really not the case. There is a little website you can go to for more information called www.authorxml.com, and that's just a little microsite that just lets people know, what you can do with FrameMaker in terms of doing pure XML editing. Just wanted to add that. That's all.
Awesome. Great. Let's do one more question before we have time for questions from the audience. So like a big question, and let's see what kind of answer we get. How do you streamline processes in order to reduce costs? Can you guys, has something worked for you? How did you reduce cost, or what kind of processes?
If I could jump quickly, this is Maxwell again. I'm actually saying this on behalf of my clients, particularly when I was in localization working for translation agencies. Two things. One of them is do what Julie said, migrate to XML or to DITA. That can really streamline and reduce costs a lot because XML gives you a separation between your content and the formatting. The formatting is not embedded within the text. And also in XML authoring, including when you're authoring with FrameMaker as well, FrameMaker XML, you're almost punished for doing a format override. And people who've used either unstructured FrameMaker or Word are very prone to just want to select some text and use Control-I to make it italic, or that sort of thing. Or perhaps some people get clever and want to make up a third type of a bulleted list, which leads to inconsistency. The second thing that can dramatically reduce cost is what we talked about earlier, which is single sourcing. It's that ability to have one set of files that go out to all of your published formats, including mobile. And one thing I wanted to add to that that's very important, it'd be very rare that 100% of the paragraphs in your print publications would go to a screen. You wouldn't want to just publish it out as is to a mobile device or to a tablet. In most cases, you would use something like conditional text control, or if you're using XML, for instance, in FrameMaker, you would filter by attribute to basically have certain elements temporarily disappear. So you'd have some of your content suppressed when you go to smaller devices because you are working with people with a shorter attention span. And whenever you publish into mobile, always assume that somebody is standing on their feet. Or still, how long do they want to stand on that marble floor while they're reading mobile? And those things have dramatically reduced costs and streamlined.
Great. Julie, you already shared the case study. Anything to add to this topic?
No, I think that we've done a lot already to reduce our costs. I think that you have to keep in mind that it isn't all about cost reduction, though. You have to maintain your quality and stay true to your strategy. So there's a point where you have diminishing returns, with reducing costs. So I don't really have anything else to add to that.
Okay, great. We're already nearly at the end. Let's dive right into questions from the audience. Let's see, Jean-François, do you recommend co-location with the production teams? Co-location with your own team? Julie, Max, do you guys want to address this question?
Hey, this is Max. I was going to say, no, you don't want to have coordination. Just kidding. Just kidding.
No, sorry, co-location.
Oh, co-location. You know what? It sounded like coordination. I apologize. So do you want co-location with your production team and like the rest of your team? I'd say from my own personal experience, I don't think that's really critical. Two of the language translation companies I worked with, number one, we were certainly not in the same location as our clients were, but frequently I had to manage production teams that were in different locations, basically due to language capabilities. Some of our publishing, for instance, was in Arabic, and there are fluent Arabic publishers outside of the Middle East, but not a lot, so naturally I worked a lot with Egypt and Dubai, and so virtually everything I did was with Skype and with screen sharing through something like Adobe Connect. So it is possible to effectively have production not under the same roof. That's been my own experience.
Okay, great. Julie, is that an issue for you?
No, I agree. I think in today's world that, co-location doesn't seem to be that important. You can do so many things in other ways right now that I don't think it's important.
Yeah, and I have to veto that. I have a small digital marketing agency. We all work remotely. I love it. It's fantastic. Okay, next question. I'm probably going to throw this question at you, David. What do you suggest for localization of social media-based content? For example, support forum content. Is anything to share?
This is for me?
Yep.
Oh, well, obviously, you have to define better what your social media is trying to achieve. If your social media is part of your marketing plan, so you would have to be true to what you're trying to achieve in your marketing. But like any other type of translation, you still have to be consistent in what styles you're going to use. So if you're going to use like an informal style on your social media and more of a formal style on your regular marketing materials, then you're going to have to keep those consistent throughout and specific for each medium.
Okay, great. Max, Julie, do you have any experience localizing social media content?
I don't directly, although I did work with a team that did do this. My last job in localization, the company I worked for, we had a client who was doing social media content in Dutch, and I believe it was Facebook and Twitter. I think it was both things. It was for a specific campaign. It was something like a candy bar or something, and ironically, the localization was not only in Dutch, it was in what they called Dutch hip-hop. So in other words, it would be kind of like gangsta street music type slang, the Dutch version of that. I do recall that there was not a large population of linguists available. Virtually anyone who speaks Dutch does speak English. People of that country are often fluent in 5 to 7 languages, but that was the most challenging one that I can think of. There are people doing that, but I haven't done it directly other than that one project.
Okay.
I think one of the most interesting projects that we ever did in localization was to localize an icon-based product that was just slang in its source. So we not only had to find the equivalent in each country, but more conservative countries, more conservative locales, you wouldn't translate WTF the same way. You'd want to be able to have it usable, but perhaps not in the same vernacular.
Great. All right. So we're actually out of time. We still have a lot of questions from the audience. Maybe we'll have a part 2 or another web panel on this topic at some point. I would like to thank Julie and Max for being part of this web panel. I really enjoyed co-moderating this panel with David. What's next? Again, thank you to NetTranslators for being the host of this session. I'm very honored to be able to be part of these events. Any last words? Julie, I'll start with you. Any last tips, thoughts, anything?
It's hard to cover so much on a topic in a short amount of time, but if anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help in any way I can.
Great. Max? Max, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm on mute. I was gabbling to the air. I wanted to toss out one final thought that has nothing to do with Adobe or the products I support, but it's an issue that comes up, and actually something David said made me think of that. Another thing to be very sensitive to if you're going to new locales, and this would be certainly true of social media, is also images and icons. And I used to work for a company called Enlaso, E-N-L-A-S-O. It's www.enlaso.com. If you go to their website and do a search, you can search for a white paper I wrote about a series of icons that had to be culturally correct for McDonald's. When you go to McDonald's and flip over the hamburger box, there's like little symbols like a ruler for fat and some type of a icon for protein. And it's actually kind of unintentionally funny. The white paper that I covered revealed these amazing reactions that different cultures had to seemingly innocuous icons. And so I think imagery is very important as well. You can't just run out and do a bunch of stock photography that's appropriate for a Western audience and expect it to fly in either Muslim worlds or even South America. That's just one last hint.
Yeah, yeah, remember that project well. David, any last thoughts, comments?
Well, actually, I missed everybody else's last thoughts and comments because somehow I got kicked off and I was able to quickly jump back on. But in general, documentation localization for us is, as I mentioned at the beginning, really almost our bread and butter. And it's exciting to be part of how it's evolved. Certainly in the last 10 years, there's such a difference today between what we were working on 10 years ago. You know, we would get PDFs, and the customer would say, you know, we need these in 10 languages, and you know, and they'd look at you cross-eyed, like, you know, say, well, you know, give us the sources. You know, we outsource the documentation. We don't have the sources. So it's a different world today in the types of content and the types of knowledge that the customers have.
Absolutely. I think that's a great finish. And again, Julie, Max, David, thank you very much. Thank you to our audience, and the recording will probably be available by early next week. That said, thank you very much, and we look forward to having you attend the next web panel. All right, thanks guys. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.